seedlings are looking really good.
Yeah, they should be ready to plant soon.
I understand your concern, but we need to ensure this area is safe for everyone before we can proceed with any further work.
I know it's not easy, but we have to keep going.
I understand, but I'm just so tired of it all.
I was just thinking about that time we went to the market.
Oh yeah, that was a funny day, wasn't it?
Are you almost finished with that part?
Just about. This should be the last of it.
So what are we going to do about the well? We need to find a way to fix it quickly.
I'll go check the tools we have. Now for yourself, I guess.
Hey, you look so beautiful today. Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
So I was telling him, you really need to consider what she's been going through lately.
I'm harvesting these leaves.
We have been so busy with the new contract. We had to work late every night this week.
The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses down on the chest and makes every breath feel like a weight. And in that silence, a woman sat alone at the edge of a wooden bed, staring into the darkness as if it could provide answers she no longer had. Her trembling hands clutching a wrinkled piece of paper that reminded her of the debt she could not escape. 20 million dong, a number that had haunted her dreams for months, a number that had become a curse on her family and her dignity. And now there were only 2 days left before the men who lent the money would return to collect. And if she did not pay, they would take more than just her pride. They would take her peace, her safety, and perhaps even her son's career. Because her son was a policeman, and if anyone discovered that his mother was drowning in gambling debt, his future would shatter instantly. And that thought alone made her shiver harder than the night air. She had tried. God knew she had tried. She sold the chickens in the yard. She sold the last few fish she raised in the pond. She borrowed from neighbors, begged from distant relatives, and still she only managed to scrape together 2 million. A pathetic amount compared to the mountain still looming over her. And with every attempt, she felt the walls closing in tighter, suffocating her hope, crushing her resolve. And yet she could not let her children see her despair. She could not let her son, the proud policeman, know just how desperate she had become, because she feared the shame in his eyes would kill her faster than any debt collector's threat. Morning came, but the heaviness did not lift. The sun rose, mocking her with its golden light that illuminated the cracks in her small home, the peeling paint, the worn-out mats, all of it a reminder that she had nothing left to give. And still the debt remained, waiting like a predator in the shadows. She told herself she would try one more path. She remembered a friend, an old friend, someone she had once helped when life was kinder to her, someone who had borrowed from her in the past and whom she never once pressured, and she clung to that memory as if it were a rope thrown to a drowning woman. She walked slowly, each step heavy with both hope and dread, rehearsing in her mind the words she would use, how she would explain, how she would swallow her pride to beg for help. And when she finally stood at the gate of her friend's house, her heart beat so violently she thought it might burst. Her friend welcomed her with a smile, polite, curious, perhaps even warm at first. But as soon as the subject of money came up, that warmth evaporated like dew in the sun. The smile faded, the eyes hardened, and suddenly the air between them grew sharp like glass. "You want me to help you now?" the friend said, the tone cutting, almost cruel. Have you forgotten how you treated me when I owed you? How you stood at my door demanding money, embarrassing me in front of my family, pressuring me until I thought I would lose my mind. And now you want me to forget all of that? The woman tried to explain, tried to say that she was desperate, that the debt collectors would ruin her, that she was not the same person she had been then, but her words fell into a void where no sympathy lived. The friend crossed her arms, shook her head, and said firmly, "I cannot help you. I will not. You made your choices. Now you live with them." The rejection hit like a physical blow. Her knees trembled, her eyes burned, but no tears came, only the raw ache of humiliation. And without another word, she turned and left, her footsteps uneven on the dirt road, her chest tight with shame and despair. She walked for what felt like hours, though the sun had hardly moved, her mind spiraling in circles, each thought darker than the last, until she found herself sitting on the side of the road, too tired to cry, too exhausted to even think of the future. The world around her blurred, voices of passers-by faded, and for a long moment she felt utterly invisible, a shadow in a world that had turned its back on her. And then, unexpectedly, a voice cut through the fog, deep but gentle, curious but kind. "Are you all right, miss? You look troubled." She lifted her head and saw a man, a stranger standing before her, his clothes simple, his eyes steady, the kind of eyes that seemed to see past walls and pretenses. Embarrassed, she tried to wave him away, mumbling that it was nothing, just a little fatigue. But he did not move. He sat down near her as if determined to share her silence until she spoke. Eventually, the weight of her secret became too heavy, and against her better judgment, the words spilled out. She told him of the debt, the gambling, the shame, the deadline that loomed like a guillotine. And as she spoke, she expected judgment, perhaps laughter, perhaps scorn. But instead, she saw only quiet compassion in his eyes. When she finished, when the last broken syllable escaped her lips, there was a long pause, the kind of pause that stretches eternity. And then the man reached into his bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here," he said simply, holding it out to her. "This is 20 million, enough to clear your debt. Take it." At first she thought she misheard. She laughed bitterly, thinking it a cruel joke. But when she looked again, the envelope was still there, solid, undeniable. Her hands shook as she reached for it, but then pulled back, her pride, her fear, her disbelief all warring within her. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you help a stranger? Why would you risk so much for someone like me?" The man smiled faintly, a smile that carried both sadness and strength. "Because once, long ago, someone helped me when I was drowning, and I never forgot. Because life is too short to watch another soul suffer when you can ease their burden. And because I believe kindness, no matter how rare, is the only debt worth carrying." His words struck something deep in her, something she had buried beneath layers of guilt and regret. And before she could stop herself, tears finally came, hot and uncontrollable, streaming down her face as she clutched the envelope to her chest. For the first time in years, she felt the crushing weight lift just slightly, just enough to breathe. That night, as she returned home with the money safe in her hands, her children saw her differently. Her son looked at her with cautious hope. Her daughter clapped with innocent joy, and she herself felt torn between relief and guilt. Because though the debt was paid, a new debt had been born, one of gratitude, one of responsibility to repay not just the money, but the trust, the faith of a stranger who saw light in her when she could no longer see it herself. And as she lay in bed, the envelope resting on the small table beside her, she whispered a promise to herself and to the stranger whose name she still did not know, that she would rise, that she would fight, that she would never again let her weakness drag her family into darkness. Yet deep inside, a voice whispered that fate was not done with her, that kindness and danger often walked hand in hand, and that this was not the end of her story, but only the beginning. The morning after receiving the money was not like any other morning, for the house seemed filled with a fragile kind of light, the kind that slips through cracks after a storm, not strong enough to erase all traces of darkness, but enough to make people believe, if only for a moment, that survival was possible. And the woman sat at the small wooden table, staring at the envelope still heavy with banknotes, unable to shake the thought that her life had been altered by the hands of a stranger. And though her son smiled faintly when she placed the money before him, though her daughter clapped her hands with relief, she knew deep inside that this was not the end of her troubles, but merely the beginning of a new chapter, written in shadows and uncertainty. Her son, the policeman, held the money with hesitation, his eyes narrowing, suspicion threading through his relief, because he was trained to see lies where others saw kindness, to find motives where others saw miracles. And while he was grateful that his mother's burden had been lifted, part of him could not silence the question burning in his chest. Why would any man give away $20 million to a stranger? What did he want in return? The mother tried to soothe his doubts, telling him the man was good, that his heart was pure, that sometimes in this cruel world kindness did still exist. But even as she spoke, she remembered the stranger's eyes, calm yet shadowed, steady yet carrying weight, and though his words had been gentle, something in them suggested he too carried scars, secrets that were not meant to be spoken. She told herself it did not matter, that gratitude was all that mattered now. Yet when she lay awake at night listening to the crickets outside her window, she could not silence the thought that debts of kindness were the most dangerous kind, because they could never be measured, never be fully repaid, and because they tied hearts together in ways that fate could easily exploit. Meanwhile, in the narrow alleys of the town, whispers were already beginning to spread. Whispers of the debt collectors who had been robbed of their prey. Whispers of the policeman's mother who had miraculously found the money. Whispers that carried with them both curiosity and malice. For those men who lent money with cruel interest, who thrived on fear and broken families, failure was an insult they could not swallow, and in dimly lit rooms they cursed her name, plotting how they might reclaim their dominance, how they might punish her for escaping the snare they had set so carefully. They told themselves that if word spread that a woman could escape their grasp, others might follow. And so they decided that though the debt was settled, the lesson was not. And somewhere in the darkness of that decision, danger began to coil, silent, patient, waiting for the moment to strike. The eye, back at home, the mother tried to return to ordinary life, cooking meals, sweeping the small yard, pretending that the nightmare was over. But her son noticed the way her hands shook when she thought no one was watching, the way she flinched at sudden knocks on the door, the way her smile lingered only a second before fading into haunted silence. He wanted to ask, to dig into the truth, to know more about this mysterious man who had appeared like an angel with 20 million dong. But each time he saw the exhaustion in his mother's face, the fragile relief she clung to, and he swallowed his questions, vowing instead to protect her from the shadows he could not yet name. Days passed, but the peace was brittle, like glass stretched too thin. And one afternoon, as the mother returned from the market with a basket of vegetables, she found herself followed by two men, strangers with cold eyes and smiles too sharp, who trailed her at a distance but made no effort to hide their presence. She walked faster, her heart pounding, but they matched her pace. And when she finally reached the safety of her gate, she dared to glance back and saw them lingering at the corner, watching, waiting. And she knew instantly that the debt collectors had not forgiven, that their anger had not been buried with the payment. That night she did not sleep, her ears tuned to every creak, every rustle of the wind, her mind spinning with fears she dared not voice, because how could she explain to her son that even victory carried the scent of danger? And yet, even amid this fear, there was something else, something she could not ignore. The thought of the stranger, the kind man who had saved her from ruin. She had not seen him since that day, had not even learned his name, but she felt his presence in her thoughts like a candle burning quietly in the dark, and part of her longed to find him, to thank him again, to tell him that his generosity had not been wasted. But another part of her feared what that connection might mean, feared what secrets lay behind his quiet smile, feared that perhaps fate had tied her to him for reasons she did not yet understand, reasons that could bring as much danger as salvation. Her son, too, could not silence his curiosity, and one evening after his patrol, he asked her again, more firmly this time, "Mother, who is this man really? Where did he come from? And why would he give you so much?" She hesitated, torn between honesty and the desperate need to protect her fragile hope. And finally, she said softly, "He is just a man who remembered what it means to be human. A man who knows that suffering does not last forever if we share the burden. That is all you need to know." But her son saw the flicker in her eyes, the doubt she tried to bury, and though he said nothing, he resolved silently to find this stranger himself, to uncover the truth before it was too late. And so the story thickened, threads of kindness and suspicion intertwining with shadows of revenge. And as the family sat together at night sharing meals, laughing faintly, trying to rebuild the illusion of normalcy, they did not see the storm gathering beyond their door. They did not see the eyes watching from afar, nor did they hear the whispers that promised the past was not finished with them. The mother prayed each night that her children would never pay for her sins, that the kindness of one man would not become the curse of them all. But deep inside, she knew prayers alone could not stop fate, and that soon, very soon, they would all learn that debts, whether of money or mercy, always come due in the end. The days that followed became a cruel test of endurance, for although the family had settled the debt, peace remained an illusion, fragile and trembling like a candle in the wind. The mother woke every morning with dread in her chest, her ears tuned to the faintest sound outside, half expecting to find their door painted with threats, their yard littered with shattered glass. Her children noticed her unease, though she tried to mask it with smiles and small jokes, cooking their favorite meals as though normalcy could be stitched back together with bowls of soup and laughter forced through trembling lips. But fear was a shadow too thick to erase, and the shadow only grew when word spread that the debt collectors were furious, humiliated that she had found a way to escape their grasp. Men like them thrived on control, and for someone to walk away unbroken was an insult they could not forgive. It was the son, the policeman, who first noticed the signs. Footsteps that lingered too long outside their home, whispers in the marketplace that ceased when he drew near, the sensation of being watched from alleys shrouded in smoke. His instincts screamed that danger was circling, tightening like a noose, and he told his mother one evening as they sat by the dim glow of the lamp, "They will not stop, Mother. You must tell me the truth. Who was the man who gave you that money? What does he want?" The mother hesitated, torn between the desperate need to protect her son from secrets that did not belong to him and the weight of guilt that crushed her with each passing day. Finally, with tears filling her eyes, she whispered, "I do not know, my son. He came when I was lost. He helped when I was broken. That is all I can say. But sometimes I fear that his kindness carries chains I cannot yet see." The son's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with determination. "Then I will find him," he said firmly, "and I will find those who seek to harm you. If they want war, they will find they are not the only ones who know how to fight." Yet even as he spoke bravely, the mother's heart clenched, for she knew that violence only fed violence, and that the path her son threatened to walk would drag him into the same shadows she had tried so hard to shield him from. The storm broke on a night heavy with rain. The family sat together at dinner when the sound of shattering glass ripped through the air, and before they could react, a brick crashed into their small home, landing on the floor with a note tied crudely around it. The son snatched it up, his face darkening as he read the words scrawled in jagged ink. You cannot hide. The debt may be paid, but the lesson is not. Prepare to suffer. The mother's hands shook as she clutched her daughter to her chest, her mind spinning with terror. The son stormed out into the rain, gun at his side, eyes blazing with fury, but the street was empty, the night swallowing the cowards who hid behind threats. That night, no one slept. The mother prayed in silence, whispering apologies to a God she feared had long stopped listening. The daughter wept quietly, clutching her brother's arm, while he sat by the window watching the storm, his mind racing with plans of defense, strategies, and vengeance. He was not only a son now, he was a protector, and he would not allow the shadows to consume his family. Yet deep inside, he too wondered about the stranger, the man who had appeared like an angel, offering salvation in the form of 20 million dong. Was it coincidence? Or had the man known that by saving them, he would also paint a target on their backs? The truth came sooner than expected. 2 days later, as the mother returned from the market, she found herself confronted not by the debt collectors, but by the stranger himself. He stood beneath a tree, his figure tall yet weary, his eyes carrying both sorrow and secrets. She froze, her basket trembling in her hands, and before she could speak, he stepped forward and said quietly, "They will not stop. You must be ready." Her heart raced, fear mingled with gratitude, and she asked the question that had haunted her nights. "Why me? Why would you help me? What do you want from us?" The man's gaze dropped, his voice heavy as he answered, "Because once, long ago, someone helped me when I was nothing. I was a gambler, a criminal, a man with nothing but debts and enemies. Your kindness to a stranger years ago saved me from ruin, though you do not remember it. I swore that if the chance ever came, I would repay it. Now fate has brought me back to you." Her mind reeled, searching her memory for the face of the broken man she had once offered bread to, or perhaps coins, but the years had blurred, and she could not recall. Still, her heart ached, for she realized that kindness had returned to her like a circle completed, only now that kindness carried with it danger she could not escape. Before she could ask more, the son appeared, his eyes narrowing as he saw the stranger. He demanded answers, his voice sharp, his hand on his weapon, but the man only shook his head. "Your enemies are coming," he warned. "They will not forgive. They mean to break you, not for money, but for pride. You must be stronger than them, or you will lose everything." And with that, he vanished into the rain, leaving behind only confusion and a deepening sense of doom. That night, the attack came. The debt collectors, furious and emboldened, descended on the small home with sticks and knives, their laughter cruel, their threats echoing through the night. The mother clutched her daughter, trembling, while the son stood at the doorway, his gun raised, his heart pounding with rage. The fight was brutal, the clash of steel and shouts tearing through the silence, and though he managed to drive them back with the force of his training and his fury, he was injured, blood staining his uniform as he collapsed to his knees. The mother screamed, rushing to his side, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. And in that moment, she realized the full cost of her sins, that her choices, her weakness for gambling, had dragged her son into the fire. But then, out of the darkness, the stranger returned, with a force and ferocity that stunned even the attackers. He fought them off, his fists striking with the desperation of a man who had lived too long with regret. The debt collectors, unprepared for his intervention, fled into the night, their threats echoing as they disappeared. When silence fell at last, the stranger stood over the broken family, his chest heaving, his face shadowed with sorrow. He looked at the son, bleeding but alive, and then at the mother, whose tears fell like rain, and he said softly, "The circle is complete. I have given back what was once given to me, but the rest is up to you." And then he was gone. The family never saw him again. They searched, they asked, but he had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the memory of his strength and his warning. The son healed, his wounds becoming scars that reminded him daily of the night their lives almost ended. The mother changed too. She gave up gambling forever, devoting her days to rebuilding trust, to caring for her children, to making sure no shadow of her past would ever threaten them again. And though fear lingered, though whispers of revenge still haunted the town, they stood stronger now, bound by love, by survival, and by the memory of the stranger who had appeared when they needed him most. For in the end, this was not merely a story of debt and repayment. It was a story of cycles, of mistakes passed down, of kindness repaid, of sins punished and forgiven. It was a reminder that no one lives alone, that every action, whether cruel or kind, ripples outward into the lives of others, returning when least expected. And as the mother stood at her door one morning, watching the sun rise after a long night of fear, she whispered a prayer not for herself, but for the stranger who had saved them, wherever he might be, hoping that someday, somehow, peace would find him too.